The systemic failure to care for our veterans, both young and old, isn't confined only to the Department of Veterans Affairs. The seeds for this failure and appalling treatment of many former members of our Australian Defence Force can also be found in the complete failure of leadership at the highest levels of the Australian Defence Forces. A culture of cover-up, lies and official misconduct can be found in both the Department of Veterans Affairs and the Australian Defence Force. And the only remedy to address the gross injustices is for a Royal Commission to be held in the Department of Veterans Affairs, the senior military leadership and their toxic culture of cover-up, which has been present for more than 2 decades. There are many reasons why a Royal Commission must be established into the way veterans, former Australian Defence Force members and serving Australian Defence Force members have been treated. Obscenely high suicide rate in our young veterans. The cover-up of appallingly high levels of abuse and sexual assaults in our military. The negligent under-resourcing and staffing of our military. The official prescription of antipsychotic drugs for our combat troops serving in war zones. The criminal waste of resources and mismanagement of defence procurement. But perhaps one of the most compelling reasons why a Royal Commission should be established into the management of defence is sitting in the public gallery today. I'd like to acknowledge a former Lieutenant of the Australian Army and Tasmanian lad, Marcus Saltmarsh. Marcus served in East Timor, Iraq and Afghanistan. I want to thank you for your service, mate, like many other Australians will. And because this government and Prime Minister, despite repeated written requests from myself, refuses to apologise for the appalling abuse Marcus has suffered, I'd like to apologise as a senator from Tasmania, his home state, for the incredible abuse and or incompetence he's been forced to endure by certain leaders of our military. Mr President, during active service in East Timor on the 9th of August 2000, then Trooper Saltmarsh's Steyr rifle, independently and without user manipulation, discharged accidentally and killed his best mate, Corporal Stuart Jones. Following that tragic event, Mr Saltmarsh, then a non-commissioned rank, on the recommendation of a military board of inquiry, was forced to face a military courts-martial, which prosecuted him for military offences similar to those of a civilian manslaughter offence. 500 days after the death of his mate, Corporal Stuart Jones, Mr Saltmarsh was exonerated by the military courts-martial with a finding of no case to answer. This official finding, however, was never made public, unlike the initial Military Board of Inquiry's adverse recommendations, which were shared, along with Mr Saltmarsh's identity, with the Australian media and broader world community. Marcus claims that strong evidence existed at the time of Corporal Jones' death showing systemic mechanical faults and oversights present in a very large number of Army Steyr rifles and an Army-wide weapons technical inspection oversight, all of which could have contributed in specific conditions to an independent weapon discharge. In relation to Mr Saltmarsh's claim of faulty weapons, in correspondence to the Prime Minister, I brought to his attention the fact that media reports at the time of Corporal Jones' death indicated that 77 accidental discharges of the Army-issued Steyr rifle had occurred during the East Timor peacekeeping mission. The Minister has subsequently admitted that 10 unassisted Steyr discharges had occurred. Disturbingly, Mr Saltmarsh reports that the initial Board of Inquiry's adverse and supposedly accidental leak to the media effectively paraded him in front of the public, which caused significant damage to his personal reputation and psychological well-being. Conveniently for the generals in charge of the Army at the time and government ministers, that media leak by unknown members of the ADF or public service also had effect of turning Lieutenant Saltmarsh into a public scapegoat who distracted media and public attention away from reports of those systemic mechanical faults in the Army's rifles. And despite official promises to Mr Saltmarsh, those responsible for the leak have never been identified. Following a break of 3 years from the regular Army, and also following Mr Saltmarsh's deployment to Baghdad in 2005, he was selected for officer training, which he undertook successfully and graduated from the Royal Military College in 2010. Mr Saltmarsh then served as an officer in Afghanistan in 2011. He says following the death of his close friend, Corporal Stuart Jones, and even as an officer, that abuse and harassment from all ranks dogged his whole military career. Mr Saltmarsh says this abuse could have been avoided if he'd been able to be properly and publicly exonerated. The Australian military at the highest levels, including the Inspector General of the Defence Force, Jeff Hurley and General Morrison, have never, despite repeated written requests, publicly exonerated or apologised to Mr Saltmarsh. It's alleged by Mr Saltmarsh that the Australian military, through Chief Judge Advocate of the ADF, Major General Ian would, however, find time to send Mr Saltmarsh, despite his request that they not be sent, 28 autopsy photos of his best mate, Corporal Stuart Jones, undergoing an autopsy on a mortuary slab. 6 years after legal proceedings against him ended, I have photocopies of these autopsy photos and I am appalled and disgusted, and I demand an independent judicial inquiry immediately into this matter. The key question for this inquiry is this: was it sheer incompetence that caused these photos to be sent to Mr Marcus Saltmarsh, or was it a deliberate, abusive act? Marcus discharged recently and now, like many veterans, has a long, drawn-out bureaucratic uphill battle against the Department of Veterans Affairs to receive the entitlements he has earned. But I can assure you, he is not in the fight. He's not alone in the fight when it comes to fighting against our entitlements against Veterans Affairs. My staff and myself will be there to assist, just as we will attempt to assist every veteran who seeks my help.